My brother ran away to Canada, Europe, Africa to get away from the madness. Some people went to, Colorado and California and Vermont and started communes. Some people went into the factories of the Northeast to build a worker resistance to war. Some people went into the Democratic Party to build a peace wing within the party, and resulted in McGovern's nomination and crushing defeat. And we did what we did. We organized an illegal formation to try to resist what we thought was an impending repression, American fascism, and we decided we wanted to make it painful for the war makers to go on. I've never defended what we did outright. I've written a memoir about it, trying to explain how a kid like this got into a situation like that. I don't advocate it. And I was underground for 11 years. I came back, I got a doctorate, and I've been a nonviolent, direct action warrior ever since, and I urge that on all of you. Thanks.
Hi. You wrote in your book, Fugitive Days, that you were inspired when Paul Potter of SDS questioned you, and the one that I remember was, how are you going to live your life so that you reflect your values? I think
the way he said it was, yeah. You're right. Paul Potter was the president of SDS, a very good friend of mine eventually, but when I first met him, he had given a speech in which he said, how will you, young people, live your life in such a way that you won't make a mockery of your values?
Mockery.
Exactly.
Well, I was similarly inspired. Actually, I'm 10 years younger than you are. And I was similarly inspired by you.
Thank you.
And your comrades and a lot of other people to my lifetime of activism. And I was going to ask you to talk to these folks about how they could live their life in the Paul Potter vein. I think you just finished doing that. But if you have anything to add to that, sure. I would appreciate you being able to tell this younger generation how they can live their life that way. And I'd also like to personally thank you for being an inspiration to me and the way I've lived my life.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you very much. Paul Potter inspired me. I was 20 years old, and we were having the first teach-in against the war in Vietnam, the first teach-in ever. And the teach-in came about because we were trying to get the faculty to go on strike. And most of the faculty, and I am a faculty member now, and so I can see their resistance, they wouldn't go on strike. They said, faculty don't go on strike. What are we going to withhold? Our teaching? But they said, we will spend a day talking about Vietnam. And so the faculty, and we were really a bunch of crazy, intrepid organizers at Michigan. I remember one guy going to a sociology professor and saying, he wanted him to sign a petition against the war and give a donation so the petition could be in the New York Times. And the professor listened to him and then said, the problem is it's not my field of expertise. I always worry when professors say that, He said, I don't know. Some days I'm for the war, He said, maybe I should study it more. And so Stan brought him a stack of literature, which he came back a week later and said, did you study it? Now what do you think? The professor said, well, because it's not my area of research or expertise, some days I'm for the war and some days I'm against the war. And Stan, not to miss a beat, said, could I come back on one of those days you're against the war and get you to sign the petition then? The challenge that Paul Potter put out to us as 20-year-olds, he was probably 25 at the time, he said he had given a speech in the first march against the war in Vietnam, which was in 1965, just as the buildup was beginning. It was called by SDS. And Paul said, how do you stop a war? How do you stop it when you see your government doing things that are wrong? Do you sit in? Do you try to stop troop trains? Do you do this? Do you do that? And then he said to me personally, you need to find a way to live your life that doesn't make a mockery of your values. Now, there's no way that someone at a podium can tell you what that means, but there's an implication to it. And the implication is you have values, or you're a person who can unearth your values, and you can name them. And this is what I spend a lot of my time as a teacher-educator doing, is I want my students to name their values and take those values with them into school. And I don't want to tell them exactly what those values should be, but as long as you asked, I'll advocate for one, which is, I carry in my back pocket, which is reflected in in the U.S. Constitution, Declaration of Independence, every major religion, and it also happens to be Article 1 of the UN Declaration on Human Rights. And Article 1 reads in full, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, endowed with reason and conscience, and should act one another in the spirit of brotherhood," and we would add sisterhood. Doesn't that sound lovely and wonderful? What's the implication of that for you if you're a teacher or if you're a citizen? We're all equal. How do we treat one another equally? How do we end the unnecessary suffering that human beings visit on one another? That's one I want to urge on you. But your own values are things you have to get in touch with. But if you can name them, you can try to live up to them. You will fail. You'll fall short every day. But at least you can get up the next morning and aspire to something better. And that's what I take your comment to mean. Thank you. Yes?
I was just wondering, especially as a self-proclaimed communist, why you took $5,000 from a school who's making budget cuts across the board to talk about education.
What makes you think I'm a self-proclaimed communist?
Because you said it.
I've never said it.
You're self-proclaimed.
I'm not that self-proclaimed. You're proclaiming me now.
But why you're taking money from a school who's making budget cuts across the board to talk about education reform and low funding?
You know, I think that's a great question, and I'm giving it all back. No, you know, this was something that was booked through Evil Twin Booking, and this is what they did, and I think you make a good point. So I'll have to think about living my life so it doesn't make a mockery of my value. Okay, I'm going to think about that, but thank you. Yeah.
Well, I feel that you make a mockery of my values.
Okay.
Because I value this country and what it stands for, and so right here, right now, will you apologize?
What is it you want me to apologize for?
Bombing the Pentagon and the Capitol building.
Well, I'll tell you.
American flag.
I love this country, so the fact that you and I don't disagree about that, but I love the country so much that I want it to live up to the values of human rights and human dignity. And I think it's a mistake. I think, first, there are two things I want to argue are a mistake, and then I'll talk a minute about the question of apology. The first thing that's a mistake is to think that loving the country means blind obedience to the country. That's what happens. That's what happens in authoritarian regimes. In democracies, we love our country by struggling with it. Did Henry David Thoreau love his country? I think he did. Did he go to jail opposing slavery? Yes, he did. Did he not pay his taxes for the Mexican incursion? Yes, he did. I don't think you can say Henry David Thoreau was not a patriot. I think he was a patriot. That's one flaw, I think, in what you're implying. The second is, it seems to me that that we have to acknowledge that in a wild, diverse society like ours, we are all citizens, and we all have an opinion, and we all have a right to express that opinion. So it's not a question of deciding who are the real Americans and who are the fake Americans or the unreal Americans. I'm as real as they get, and the fact that I think that we ought to have a more just economic system, that we ought to not be an imperial power, that we ought to fight to stamp out the legacy of white supremacy, that doesn't make me not an American. That makes me an American with certain values. You're an American with perhaps other values. We can argue about that, we can learn from it, we can talk about it. In terms of my past behavior, I've said again and again that you can't get to be 64 years old